Meyer, a young black woman, had just finished her shift at work. After a long, exhausting day, all she wanted to do was grab a few essentials from the supermarket and head home to relax. It was a Saturday evening, and the parking lot was buzzing with people eager to finish their shopping and enjoy the weekend. As she drove through the lot, her mind was on the mundane task ahead, finding a parking space. The usual routine. But this Saturday, everything was about to change. She spotted an open space near the entrance of the store, and with a sense of relief, she carefully aligned her car between the lines. She had just parked when the screeching of tires jolted her attention. A white SUV sped into the space next to hers, stopping just inches away. The driver, a middle-aged white man, glared at her with what could only be described as anger. His face flushed with frustration. Without any words exchanged, he rolled down his window and pointed aggressively at Meyer. "That spot was mine," he spat, his tone sharp and unyielding. Meyer, taken aback by the sudden confrontation, tried to remain calm. She knew this could easily escalate, so she calmly explained, "Sorry, I didn't see anyone waiting here. This encounter is far too familiar. Many of us, especially those from marginalized communities, have experienced this sudden eruption of unwarranted aggression. What might seem like an ordinary parking dispute quickly turns into something much more personal, more dangerous." Meyer's attempt to remain calm is a clear reflection of the reality that many people of color face daily, striving to navigate through a world that often views them as less than or unworthy of respect. But it's also important to highlight the power dynamics at play. Maya's first response, calm and collected, shows an understanding that she can't afford to escalate this situation further, something that people of privilege don't often have to consider when confronted with a similar issue. Instead of backing down, the man opens his door and storms toward Maya's car, blocking her way out. His eyes are filled with contempt and disdain. "Don't make excuses," he sneered, his voice dripping with superiority. "You people are always like this, pretending not to see anything, doing whatever you want." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Meyer could hear the coldness in his voice, the racist undertones that, despite being all too familiar, never failed to cut deep. She tried to stay composed, despite the sting of his words. "I'm sorry if you were waiting, but I didn't see anyone here," Maya said again, trying to explain herself. But her words had no impact. The man wasn't looking for a solution. He wasn't interested in hearing her out. Instead, he leaned in even closer, his presence suffocating. "You people never pay attention to anyone else, do you?" He sneered again. This scene is emblematic of the microaggressions that people of color often face. The way the man feels entitled to her space and his complete disregard for her humanity is a direct reflection of systemic racism. Maya's composure here is not just a sign of maturity, but an act of survival. As we analyze this, it becomes clear that racial tension, even in something as mundane as parking, is deeply embedded in everyday interactions. It's also crucial to recognize the weight of the term "you people." These words are not just an insult aimed at Meyer, but represent a broader, more insidious attack on an entire group of people. The phrase implies that there is something inherently wrong with who Meyer is, based solely on her skin color, and that she doesn't belong in the space she occupies. As the man loomed closer, Maya felt the intensity of the situation escalate. She could feel the weight of the crowd gathering around them, watching, judging. She glanced around, feeling trapped, yet she remained silent for a moment. The humiliation she was beginning to feel was amplified by the eyes of strangers, none of whom seemed willing to intervene. But then the man, with his finger jabbing toward her chest, crossed a line. "Who do you think you are, speaking to me like that?" he shouted, his voice laced with venom. "I'm sick and tired of your kind's arrogance. You people think you can do whatever you want?" Maya stood frozen, the sting of the words sharper than the physical space between them. But as the rage began to build inside her, something inside her snapped. This wasn't just a parking dispute, it was a display of dominance, of control, of entitlement. And Maya wasn't going to back down. This moment is crucial. It's when Maya begins to realize that the conflict has shifted from a simple misunderstanding to something far more insidious. It's not just about a parking space anymore. It's a question of respect, dignity, and belonging. Maya's response to this escalation, her inner struggle to maintain composure despite the increasing anger, is something that many people of color can relate to. In moments like these, the choice isn't about whether to react or not. It's about how to react in a way that doesn't feed into the narrative of aggression that society often associates with people of color. Maya's choice to stay composed is both a strategy for peace and a form of resistance. Maya was standing there, her heart racing. Every word the man spoke was an attack on her humanity, not just her parking skills. His tone, harsh and demeaning, only fueled the fire within her. She had tried to stay calm, tried to explain herself, but this man wasn't interested in understanding. He wanted to dominate. He wanted to control. The moment he stepped closer, fingers jabbed out at her chest, Maya's mind flashed with memories of other times she had been pushed to the edge. She had experienced moments like this before, small, often unspoken acts of disrespect and racism, but this time, something was different. She couldn't let it slide anymore. His words stung more than they should have. "Who do you think you are, speaking to me like that?" he continued, loud and accusatory. "You people are always so arrogant. You think you can just do whatever you want." This wasn't just a rude parking dispute anymore. This was about something deeper. The disrespect wasn't just aimed at Maya, but at her very identity, at her existence in this space. This wasn't about a misunderstanding, it was about power. It was about control. And it was about the kind of prejudice that's so ingrained in society that people don't even realize they're perpetuating it. This escalation is a perfect example of how small, seemingly inconsequential actions can lead to moments of confrontation in which a marginalized person is expected to remain passive. It's exhausting to constantly carry the burden of having to remain composed while being constantly belittled, dismissed, or targeted because of one's race. For many people of color, moments like these are not isolated incidents. They are part of a much larger, ongoing pattern of dehumanization. Maya's initial restraint is a survival tactic. For many Black individuals, particularly women, there's a constant internal battle between how to react without falling into the stereotype of being angry or hostile. What's more chilling here, the fact that the man feels so entitled, so sure that his behavior will go unchallenged, that he moves closer to Maya, invading her personal space without a hint of hesitation. This sense of entitlement is often deeply ingrained in people who hold racial privilege. Maya's breath was shallow, but she wasn't going to let him win. She could feel the anger rising within her, but she still tried to keep a hold on herself. But then, as if the situation couldn't get worse, it did. Out of nowhere, the man slapped her. The sharp sting of the slap echoed in her ears. The unexpected force caused her to stagger, her head snapping to the side. Maya stood still for a moment, her body frozen, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The physical pain was intense, but what hurt most was the sheer disrespect, the humiliation, the utter disregard for her humanity. She blinked hard, trying to fight back the tears, but there was no time to waste, no time to process. Before she could fully regain her balance, the man took a step back and sneered at her, his face twisted with a smug expression. It was clear that to him, this wasn't a mistake, it was a lesson he thought he was teaching her. This slap, a swift moment of physical violence, is a powerful symbol of the systemic abuse people of color often face. It's not just about one man's outburst. It's a manifestation of a culture that tolerates such actions. What's worse is the way he reacts afterward. Rather than showing any remorse or shock, he seems pleased, as though this was a moment of retribution that he was entitled to. It's important to reflect on how deeply ingrained racial animosity can shape the way some people respond to others, especially in situations where they feel threatened by someone of a different race or background. For Meyer, this moment is a brutal awakening. In many ways, her response is a reflection of the countless micro and macroaggressions she's endured throughout her life. The slap wasn't just physical violence, it was an insult to her dignity, to her place in the world. For a split second, Meyer was paralyzed by the shock of the assault. But then, a wave of anger and pride surged through her. This wasn't just about a parking spot. It wasn't just about him. This was about self-respect. Without thinking, Meyer raised her hand and slapped him back. It wasn't as hard, but it was enough to make him realize that she wasn't just going to take his abuse lying down. Meyer's slap was not an act of revenge, it was a declaration. It was a message. She wasn't going to let him walk all over her. She wasn't going to let him define her or take away her dignity. In that moment, she realized that sometimes standing up for yourself isn't about being the bigger person, it's about showing the world that you deserve to exist and be respected in this space, just like everyone else. The man's eyes went wide in disbelief. He staggered back, stunned by her defiance. His face turned pale as he looked at his own cheek where Meyer's slap had landed. For a brief moment, it seemed like the man was afraid not just of Meyer, but of the realization that someone had dared to stand up to him. Meyer's response is a crucial turning point in the story. What we see here is not just a physical act of retaliation, but an emotional and psychological breakthrough. The slap is a reclaiming of power, a necessary act of resistance. In moments of injustice, it's important to understand that sometimes defending oneself doesn't always fit the mold of politeness or passivity that society often expects. Meyer's choice to slap him back wasn't an angry outburst, it was an expression of her refusal to remain silent in the face of humiliation. What's important here is the man's reaction. He doesn't understand why Meyer would stand up for herself. For him, women like Meyer are meant to accept the slap and move on. His surprise at her boldness speaks volumes about his ignorance, his privilege, and his belief that he holds power over her. But the moment he's slapped back, he's forced to confront his own aggression and prejudice. As the confrontation unfolded, people began to notice. Some bystanders stopped, their eyes fixed on the altercation, some even pulling out their phones to record the scene. But despite the growing crowd, no one stepped in to help. Meyer, feeling isolated, glanced around. She could see the eyes of strangers watching her. She could feel the weight of their gazes, but no one moved to intervene. It was clear that the power dynamics at play here weren't just between Meyer and the man. They were also deeply embedded in the passive indifference of the onlookers. For many, this was just another moment to witness, another story to capture on their phones. For entertainment, no one was going to get involved. But Meyer wasn't looking for help from these strangers. She wasn't waiting for validation from them. She had already made her decision. The crowd's inaction highlights a common issue with bystander behavior. Too often, people stand on the sidelines, observing injustice unfold without intervening. This speaks to a larger societal problem where racial discrimination, aggression, and abuse are sometimes seen as acceptable or inevitable, leading to indifference in the face of cruelty. Meyer's isolation in this moment is not just a physical one, but also a symbolic reflection of how people of color often face discrimination alone, without support from those who are in a position to act. What's even more frustrating is how social media and public spaces often reduce serious moments of injustice into something to be recorded and shared, without deeper consideration of the underlying issues. The crowd here, though physically present, remains emotionally distant. After the slap, Meyer stood there, her mind still racing from the rush of emotions. She could feel the heat from the man's anger searing into her chest. But there was no time to process what had just happened. As she turned away from the confrontation, still in shock, she walked toward her car. But just as she reached it, her heart sank. Across the side of her car were deep, deliberate scratches. Someone had taken a sharp object and dragged it along the surface. Meyer stood there for a moment, speechless, staring at the damage that had been done to something she had worked hard to afford. It wasn't just the car itself that hurt, it was the realization that this was retaliation. This was punishment. Maya's anger flared again. But it wasn't just because of the physical damage to her property, it was the emotional toll. The humiliation, the shame of being targeted for simply existing in a space that was supposed to be shared by all. The vandalism of Maya's car serves as both a symbolic and physical manifestation of the racism she is facing. The damage isn't just to the car, it's to her sense of safety, her sense of worth. In moments like this, property damage becomes a form of psychological warfare. It sends the message that you don't belong, that you're somehow less than others, and that retaliation against you is justified. For Maya, this act of vandalism adds to the emotional weight of the whole situation. It's no longer just about the slap, it's about the systematic degradation she faces. The fact that the man didn't even attempt to hide the vandalism shows his complete disregard for Maya's well-being. It's the kind of targeted attack that many people of color face daily, where their value is undermined and the consequences of standing up for themselves are tangible and real. Maya stood there for a few moments, trying to process everything that had just happened. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the deep frustration and helplessness that was now weighing down on her. The man's slurs, his slap, the damage to her car, it all seemed so senseless, so unjust. Despite the overwhelming urge to just walk away and pretend none of this happened, Maya knew she had to do something. She couldn't let him get away with this. Not now, not when she had been disrespected so deeply. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Her fingers shook as she dialed the police. The moment she spoke to the dispatcher, her voice was steady, but with a quiet determination that only comes from the knowledge that justice is a right, not a privilege. "I've been attacked and my property's been damaged," she said calmly. "I need to report a racist assault." Maya's decision to call the police is one of the few acts of control she has in this situation. In the face of such blatant aggression, many people of color often feel torn about involving law enforcement. There is a deep history of mistrust between marginalized communities and the police, but Maya makes the choice to take action. This moment is about asserting that, despite everything, she deserves the protection and support that anyone else would receive in a similar situation. It's a stand for her dignity, for her right to live in a world where she can demand accountability for her abusers. What's striking here is how Maya doesn't hesitate to call the police, even though she's fully aware of how easily this situation could be twisted in the man's favor. Her calm, measured response in the face of crisis shows an incredible strength, the strength many are forced to develop when constantly faced with systemic injustice. It wasn't long before the sound of sirens filled the air. Two police cars pulled up to the parking lot, their blue lights flashing in the dimming evening. The officers quickly stepped out of the car, their presence providing a small sense of relief to Maya. For a moment, she felt like she wasn't alone anymore. She quickly approached them, recounting everything that had happened, how the man had aggressively approached her, the slurs, the slap, and now the vandalism to her car. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of her words. This wasn't just a minor parking dispute. This was about her being violated, humiliated, and targeted because of her race. The officers listened intently, nodding as Maya explained the details of the incident. They asked her to show them the damage to her car, and Maya pointed out the deep scratches that marred the paint. One of the officers then walked over to the white SUV, where the man still sat, watching the scene unfold with a smug look on his face. The arrival of the police brings a sense of urgency to the situation, but it also introduces an element of uncertainty. For many people of color, the relationship with law enforcement is complicated. There's the fear that the police might side with the aggressor, or worse, escalate the situation. But in this case, the officers seem to understand the gravity of the situation, and Maya can only hope that they will truly listen to her and take action. Maya's calm recounting of events is important to note. It's not an emotional outburst, but a factual presentation of what occurred. She's not just trying to be heard, She's ensuring that the details are clear, that the evidence is documented. She's making sure the police can't overlook the injustice that's taken place. This is a crucial moment of empowerment for Meyer. She's taking control of the narrative and ensuring that her story doesn't get twisted. The man was far from cooperative. As soon as the officer approached his vehicle, he started yelling, "She's lying. I didn't do anything. I was just trying to park." His voice was filled with venom, attempting to shift the blame onto Maya, to paint her as the aggressor. But the officers weren't swayed by his outbursts. They listened to him, but their demeanor was firm. One officer stood by while the other began to take a statement from Meyer. As he spoke to the man, it became clear that he was trying to twist the situation, playing the role of the victim. The man's attempt to lie and frame Meyer as the aggressor is a tactic that many abusers or racists use when they find themselves caught in the act. They attempt to discredit the victim and spin the story in a way that paints them as the one who's been wronged. It's a classic defense mechanism used by those who feel entitled to act in any way they please, without facing consequences. Maya's calm and steady demeanor in the face of these lies is a testament to her resolve. She knows that the truth is on her side. She's not just fighting for herself in this moment, she's fighting for the dignity of all those who have been silenced by similar circumstances. The officers eventually left to confer with one another. When they returned, they asked Meyer if she wanted to file a formal complaint. Without hesitation, she nodded. "Yes," she said firmly, "I want to press charges." The man's aggressive behavior, the damage to her car, the racist slurs, all of it needed to be addressed. Meyer wasn't about to let this slide. She wanted justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been put in a similar position. Maya's decision to press charges is a significant one. It's an act of courage, but it's also an act of responsibility. She understands that by standing up and demanding justice, she's setting a precedent. She's sending a message that behavior like this cannot go unchecked. By pressing charges, Meyer is ensuring that her abuser will have to face the consequences of his actions. This is not just about her, it's about standing up for all those who don't have the platform or support to do the same. This moment is a powerful reflection of how individuals can create change, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. Maya's bravery isn't just about her confrontation, it's about fighting for a world where people can exist in public spaces without fear of harassment or violence because of their race. As the police took the man into custody, Meyer stood there in the parking lot, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. The man had been arrested, but this was only the beginning of what would likely be a long and challenging journey. Maya knew that the legal system was far from perfect, and that the man might still try to twist the story in his favor. The process was far from over, but for the first time that day, she felt a sense of relief. She had taken a stand, and now she was going to see it through. Maya spent the next few hours at the police station, giving her full statement, carefully recounting the events that had led to the altercation. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed the documents, but her resolve remained unshaken. She wasn't going to let this man or anyone else diminish her. She wasn't going to let him manipulate the truth or escape the consequences of his actions. The act of giving a statement to the police and formally filing charges is a process that requires tremendous strength. It's not just about recounting the events, it's about making the decision to place yourself in a vulnerable position, to relive the trauma in hopes of securing justice. Maya's unwavering commitment to pushing through despite the emotional toll reflects the broader fight that many people of color face in a justice system that has often failed them. The reality for many marginalized individuals is that the legal system can be an intimidating place. It's not always about truth and fairness, but often about power dynamics. Maya's courage and standing firm, even after the arrest, shows her determination to hold her ground and fight for what's right. As Maya left the police station that evening, she knew the battle wasn't over. The man, even though in custody, had already begun to spin his version of events. He was likely going to play the role of the victim, how he had been provoked, how he had simply defended himself, and how he hadn't meant to hurt anyone. His lies would paint a picture of him as an innocent bystander who had been unjustly attacked by an angry woman. Maya's heart sank as she thought about the possibility that the police, despite the evidence, might not fully believe her. She could already imagine the defense twisting the narrative, casting her as the aggressor, turning the blame back onto her. In these moments, it often feels like the person who has been wronged has to prove their innocence, while the person who is guilty gets to manipulate the situation to their advantage. This is the painful reality of many legal battles for people of color, particularly Black individuals. The burden of proof often falls unfairly on the victim, and they must not only recount their experience, but also navigate the intricacies of a justice system that has a long history of bias. Maya's fear of being disbelieved or having her actions twisted is not unfounded. It speaks to the deeply ingrained prejudices that often cloud judgment in legal proceedings. What's also important here is the concept of respectability politics that Maya faces. She can't just be angry. She has to remain composed and articulate to be seen as credible. This is a burden many marginalized people carry, having to constantly prove their worthiness to be treated with fairness and dignity. The days that followed were filled with phone calls, paperwork, and meetings with her lawyer. Maya was preparing for what would likely be a long and difficult trial. The man, with his entitlement and arrogance, would probably fight tooth and nail to avoid facing the consequences of his actions. He had a story to tell, one that would make him look like the victim, and Maya knew that the coming days would be filled with a lot of emotional turmoil. Her lawyer, a sharp, determined woman named Ava Hayes, helped guide Maya through the legal process. Together, they carefully reviewed the evidence, the police report, the surveillance footage from the parking lot, and the damage to Maya's car. Ava reassured her that they had a strong case, but Maya knew that a strong case didn't always guarantee a fair outcome. Still, Maya was ready. She had already faced so much, and now she wasn't going to back down. Preparing for a trial is an exhausting and emotionally draining process, especially when the stakes are so high. Maya's decision to continue pursuing the case is a testament to her strength and determination. It's easy to feel powerless when the person who wronged you has the resources and the privilege to fight back. But Maya's resolve is unwavering. She's fighting not just for her own dignity, but for others who have been wronged in similar ways. Ava's role in this process is also significant. The guidance of a strong and capable attorney can make all the difference in a case like this, where bias and racial discrimination can often cloud the legal process. Ava's commitment to Maya's case highlights the importance of having advocates who believe in the cause and are dedicated to achieving justice. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Maya walked into the courtroom with a quiet sense of determination. Her hands were clammy, but she had already made up her mind. This wasn't just about one incident in a parking lot. This was about standing up for herself, for her community, and for every person who had ever been treated unfairly because of their race. The courtroom was packed, and the tension was palpable. The man, now facing charges of assault and property damage, sat across the room, his face still cold and defiant. He had a defense attorney by his side, but Maya didn't look at him. She wasn't concerned with his lies. She was focused on telling her truth. Maya's lawyer, Ava Hayes, began the proceedings with a calm, measured opening statement. She laid out the facts of the case, emphasizing that this wasn't just a simple dispute over a parking space. It was an act of racial aggression, a targeted assault against Maya simply because of the color of her skin. Maya's bravery in this moment is awe-inspiring. Walking into that courtroom, knowing the challenges ahead, is something few people would be able to do with the same level of courage. But Maya is driven by the knowledge that her fight is about more than just her personal pain. It's about confronting the racial injustice that pervades so many aspects of society. The defense attorney's role here is telling. It's often in these moments of high stakes that the true nature of prejudice comes to light. The defense attorney's attempt to sympathize with the aggressor speaks volumes about how systemic biases can be reinforced in legal proceedings. The goal of a trial should be to pursue justice, not to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. The courtroom was silent as the trial began. Maya sat in the witness stand, her back straight, her gaze focused ahead. She had been through so much already, physically assaulted, emotionally drained, and now she was fighting for justice. The tension in the room was palpable as both sides prepared to make their case. Ava Hayes, her attorney, rose first to present the opening statement. With the calmness of someone who had been through many trials, she began by stating the key facts of the case. The man had approached Meyer with aggression over a trivial parking spot, using racial slurs and insults to demean her, and then physically assaulted her. The evidence was clear, from the police report to the surveillance footage and the damage to Maya's car. The defendant is not here today simply because of a parking dispute, Ava said, her voice steady and authoritative. He is here because of his racial animus, which manifested in an unprovoked attack on my client. Ava's words were met with a few murmurs in the courtroom. It was clear that this wasn't just a case of a simple altercation, it was a deeply rooted issue of racism and entitlement. The opening statement is crucial in any trial. It sets the tone for the entire case. Ava's focus on the racial aspect of the case is particularly significant. It's not just about a parking spot or a slap, it's about a larger societal issue. Ava's approach is a reminder that legal battles are not always just about facts. They are about narratives, about what the court decides to recognize as truth. By framing the case as one of racial aggression, Ava ensures that the jury understands the gravity of the situation beyond the surface-level dispute. What's also important here is the moment of emotional clarity that Meyer must have felt. Sitting in that courtroom, her lawyer speaking for her, Maya had to know that this wasn't just her fight anymore. This was bigger than her. It was about confronting a pervasive issue in society, one that so many have faced and continue to face in silence. The defense attorney, a well-groomed, middle-aged man, stood up next. His opening statement was slick, almost rehearsed, and he tried to appeal to the jury's emotions. "What we have here is a misunderstanding," he began. The defendant was simply trying to park his car. He was under stress and made an unfortunate reaction. He didn't intend to hurt anyone. The defense attorney painted the defendant as a man overwhelmed by life's pressures, trying to defuse the argument with the claim that Maya had provoked him. He even suggested that Maya's slap back could be seen as aggression, turning the tables on the situation. He acted out of frustration. The defense attorney continued, "He never intended for things to escalate this far." The defense attorney's argument is a textbook example of how abusers and racists often try to escape accountability by portraying the defendant as the victim of stress and frustration. The defense tries to reduce his actions to a simple mistake, a momentary lapse of judgment. This is a common tactic used to dehumanize the victim and paint the aggressor as someone who's just like everyone else when they've made a mistake. But this is where the law gets tricky for many marginalized individuals. People of color often have to prove not only that they've been wronged, but that the aggressor's actions were intentional and not simply a mistake. The defense attorney's attempt to minimize the defendant's actions by framing him as just a man having a bad day reveals the deeply entrenched bias in how society handles racial aggression. Meyer is forced to carry the weight of not only being the victim, but also justifying her right to defend herself. The prosecution called for the presentation of evidence. The first piece shown was the surveillance footage from the parking lot. As the video played on the large screen, the courtroom fell silent. The footage clearly showed the man approaching Maya's car aggressively, his gestures and words full of anger. You could see him roll down the window, shout at Meyer, and then step out of his vehicle to block her way. The footage also captured the moment he slapped Meyer. The impact was clear, the force of it making her head snap to the side. Maya's reaction was immediate. She stood still for a moment, dazed. But then she responded. The video showed Maya slapping him back, her actions a clear, measured reaction to his assault. When the footage ended, there was an audible gasp from the jury. Maya had sat through this moment before, but seeing it on the big screen, with the jury watching closely, made the reality of what had happened so much clearer. The footage was irrefutable. The man had acted out of aggression, not out of stress or a bad day. The surveillance footage is a pivotal moment in the trial. It's a visual representation of the truth, and it leaves no room for the defense's narrative to stand. In an era where everything is often reduced to he said, she said, the footage gives concrete evidence of what occurred. This moment also underscores the power of video and the role that technology can play in covering injustice. For Meyer, this moment might have been surreal. Seeing the events of that day projected for everyone to witness must have brought a mix of emotions: relief, vindication, but also a reminder of the trauma she endured. What's important here is that the evidence is undeniable. The video doesn't lie. The man's behavior is captured in all its aggression, and Meyer's slapback is a natural response to being physically attacked. Next, it was Maya's turn to take the stand. She stood up, walking with steady determination toward the witness chair. The weight of the moment was not lost on her. She knew that what she said here could make or break the case. As she sat down, the room fell into a hush. Her heart raced, but she focused on the task at hand. She wasn't here to just relive the pain. She was here to fight for justice. Her voice, though shaking slightly, remained strong as she recounted the events. She spoke of the man's aggressive approach, the racial slurs, the slap, and the emotional toll it had taken on her. She explained that she hadn't wanted any trouble. She had simply been trying to park her car. But when the man attacked her, she felt she had no choice but to defend herself. When she finished her testimony, the courtroom was still. Maya had told her story with a clarity that left no room for doubt. She wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for everyone who had ever been treated unjustly, for everyone who had been made to feel less than, simply because of the color of their skin. Meyer's testimony is not just about recounting the facts of the case, it's about her reclaiming her voice. For so long, people of color have been silenced, their voices ignored or dismissed when they speak out against injustice. Maya's decision to take the stand and share her truth is an act of immense courage. She is putting herself in a vulnerable position, knowing the weight of her words, but she is doing it with grace and dignity. This moment is also a reflection of the emotional labor many Black individuals face when they are forced to recount traumatic events. It's one thing to experience racism, but it's another to have to relive it in front of a jury, hoping that they will see the truth. Maya's ability to remain composed and focused is a testament to her resilience and determination. As Maya's testimony concluded, the tension in the courtroom shifted. The defense had one final chance to sway the jury, and they seized it with full force. The defense attorney stood, adjusting his suit jacket as he turned to face the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice smooth, but tinged with frustration. "We've heard a lot of emotions today. We've seen videos. We've heard testimony. But let's not forget that this was all a misunderstanding, a moment where emotions ran high, and people said and did things they didn't mean." He turned toward Meyer, his gaze narrowing. Meyer is a woman who retaliated in a way that escalated the situation. She could have walked away, but instead, she chose to slap my client back. This was a simple parking dispute, nothing more. He paused for a moment, letting his words settle in the room. Is that the kind of behavior we want to reward? A woman who, when confronted, chose to escalate instead of diffuse the situation. I ask you to consider the possibility that my client didn't deserve to be punished for simply defending himself. In this moment, the defense attorney is attempting to capitalize on the inherent biases in the system. His tactic is a classic one. He tries to reframe the narrative to present Meyer as the aggressor by framing the incident as just a parking dispute and focusing on her slap. He attempts to shift the blame from the defendant to the victim. This tactic is all too familiar in cases where the victim is a person of color, shifting the narrative from a clear instance of racial aggression to a story of mutual conflict. What's most chilling here, the way the defense attempts to undermine Mai's response, turning it into something that should be judged as escalatory rather than a natural defense. In his eyes, it seems that Meyer should have quietly endured the abuse. This reveals a critical flaw in how incidents of racial aggression are often dismissed or minimized by those who hold power and privilege. Ava Hayes, Maya's attorney, rose quickly to respond. She was calm but resolute as she addressed the jury, her voice unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my opponent would like you to believe that this is simply about a misunderstanding over a parking spot. But let's not allow ourselves to be distracted by this misguided defense. What we have here is an attack on a woman, an attack motivated not by some random act of frustration, but by racial animus." She took a step forward, her gaze intense and direct. Meyer didn't escalate the situation. She responded. She didn't instigate anything. The defendant approached her with aggression. He insulted her. He slapped her first. And when she defended herself, he tried to play the victim. Ava turned toward the jury, ensuring they understood the gravity of what had been said. This case is not about whether Meyer should have done something differently. It's about holding someone accountable for their actions. It's about sending a message that racism will not be tolerated and that people like the defendant must face the consequences of their actions. Ava's rebuttal is a powerful moment in the trial. It's a direct response to the defense's attempt to downplay the severity of the situation by drawing a clear line between the defendant's actions and Maya's self-defense. Ava dismantles the defense's narrative. Her argument also underscores a larger, more systemic issue: the tendency to excuse or minimize acts of racial aggression. The way Ava frames the case is crucial. She isn't just talking about a physical slap. She's talking about the emotional and psychological harm caused by racial insults, the entitlement that the defendant felt by approaching Meyer with such aggression, and the need for accountability. This argument puts the responsibility where it belongs with the defendant and makes it clear that actions driven by racial prejudice cannot be justified by flimsy excuses. As the closing statements were made, the jury was instructed to deliberate. Maya sat in the courtroom, her body tense, her mind replaying every moment of the trial. She had done everything she could, but now the outcome was out of her hands. The room felt heavy with the weight of uncertainty as the jury filed out to deliberate. Meyer could only sit there in silence, surrounded by the tension of what was to come. Her mind drifted back to the day in the parking lot, to the racist words, the slap, and the humiliation. Everything she had fought for had led her here. She had stood up for herself, for her dignity, and for justice. But would the jury see it the same way? Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Maya knew that the road ahead was long, and no matter the outcome, there would be more battles to fight. But for now, she was waiting for the truth to be recognized. This moment of waiting is one of the most intense parts of any trial. Meyer has done everything right. She's presented her case, told her story, and fought for justice. But in the end, it's out of her hands. The outcome of this trial will speak volumes about the system, whether it values truth, equality, and accountability, or whether it will once again side with the powerful. This is also a reflection of the emotional toll that victims of racial aggression often endure. The trial, though an opportunity for justice, also serves as a reminder of the trauma that continues to linger. Maya's strength in this moment is undeniable, but it's clear that the process has taken its toll. The emotional exhaustion of navigating this fight for justice is a burden that far too many have to carry. Hours passed. Finally, the jury returned to the courtroom, and the air was thick with anticipation. Maya's heart raced in her chest as she waited for the verdict. The courtroom was still as the jury 4% stood and addressed the judge. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of assault and property damage," the 4% declared. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The words she had hoped for were finally spoken. The man who had attacked her, who had tried to diminish her, was going to be held accountable. The weight of the moment hit her all at once: relief, vindication, and even a sense of peace. But the reality was that this victory wasn't just for her. It was for all those who had faced similar injustices and remained silent. This was a small step toward a larger change. Maya had won, but the fight for true justice was far from over. The moment of the verdict is one of catharsis and emotional release. For Maya, the guilty verdict is the culmination of everything she has fought for: her dignity, her voice, and her rights. But it's also a bittersweet victory. The fact that she had to go through this much to receive justice speaks to the larger problem in society. Maya's victory is a triumph, but it's not the end of the story. It's a step toward accountability. But much work remains to be done. The fact that this verdict was reached also highlights how far we've come and how much further we still need to go. Justice doesn't always come easily, and it often comes at a cost. For Maya, this was a victory. But it wasn't just about winning in court. It was about taking a stand and showing that racial aggression and violence will not be tolerated. This victory is hers, and it belongs to everyone who has fought against prejudice and discrimination. After the trial, Maya took a moment to herself. She stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the day settling over her. It was over for now. The man was guilty, and Maya had stood up for herself and her dignity. But she knew this was just one chapter in a much larger fight. There would always be more work to do, more stories to tell, and more battles to fight. Maya's victory wasn't just a personal one. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, no matter the cost. It was a reminder that we all have the power to challenge injustice, to fight for what is fair, and to demand respect and equality. And though the road ahead would be long, Maya walked forward with strength, knowing that her story, her voice could help make the world just a little bit better. This final reflection is important because it underscores the ongoing nature of the fight for justice. Even after Maya's personal victory, the work is unfinished, the system is imperfect, and the struggles of marginalized people are far from over. But Maya's story shows that change is possible. She didn't just seek justice for herself, she sought it for everyone who has been wronged. Her fight continues, and so does the fight for equality and fairness. The end of Maya's story is not the end of the fight. It's just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where people are no longer willing to stay silent in the face of injustice. The days following the trial were a whirlwind of emotions for Maya. The guilty verdict had given her a sense of justice, but as she sat alone in her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Yes, the man was held accountable for his actions, but the deep-rooted issues of racism, prejudice, and inequality were far from over. Maya spent time reflecting on the emotional journey she had been on, how her life had been forever changed in that parking lot. She had started as a young woman just trying to go about her day, only to find herself the target of someone's hatred. That incident had shaken her to the core, but it also ignited something inside her, a fire to fight back, to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been silenced, oppressed, or ignored. The quiet moments at home allowed her to process the enormity of what she had just been through, but they also gave her the clarity to see the bigger picture. Maya had fought for justice in one moment, but there were many more to come. The battle was not over. If anything, it had just begun. Maya's reflection in this moment highlights the emotional aftermath of a traumatic event. While a legal victory can bring a sense of closure, it doesn't erase the deeper emotional scars or the long-term effects of racial aggression. The emotional complexity of Maya's experience is something many people of color can relate to, the sense of victory mixed with the realization that systemic change is still desperately needed. For Maya, the legal victory is only a small piece of the puzzle. It's a symbol of what can happen when someone stands up for themselves. But it's not the end of the story. This moment is an opportunity for Maya to acknowledge both her personal growth and the broader societal issues that still need to be addressed. Maya's victory was not just about her own healing. It had a ripple effect on those around her. She started to see the power of her story, how sharing it could inspire others to find their own voices. The people in her community began to reach out to her, telling her how her strength had inspired them to take action in their own lives. She realized that this was the beginning of something bigger. The fight for justice wasn't just about winning a case in court, it was about changing the mindset of a society that often tolerated such aggression. It was about raising awareness, fostering empathy, and creating a world where people didn't have to live in fear of being attacked for the color of their skin. Maya knew that this wasn't something she could do alone. She began to seek out other activists, joining organizations that work to combat racism, promote racial equality, and provide support for people who had experienced similar injustices. Through this, she found a new sense of purpose. Maya's journey toward activism is an important turning point. It highlights how individual victories can become part of a larger movement for change. Her decision to take her story and use it as a tool for awareness and advocacy reflects the growing recognition that personal experiences are not isolated. They are part of a much larger cultural issue that needs to be addressed on a systemic level. Maya's path into activism also speaks to the power of community. She recognizes that change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when people come together, share their stories, and take collective action. Her story, once a painful and personal experience, now serves as a rallying cry for others to stand up for justice. As Maya became more involved in activism, her story began to gain attention. News outlets, social media platforms, and community organizations began to feature her as a symbol of resilience and courage. She was invited to speak at rallies, participate in panel discussions, and share her experiences in interviews. But with this newfound attention came scrutiny. While many people praised her for her bravery, there were also those who criticized her for making a big deal of a small incident. The backlash was expected, but it still stung. People who didn't understand the larger context of racial discrimination often dismissed her experience as an isolated event. They didn't see the systemic issues that allowed such an encounter to happen in the first place. Despite this, Maya remained undeterred. She used the platform she had gained to continue speaking out against racism and inequality. Her story wasn't just her own anymore, it was the story of countless others who had faced similar challenges, and she would not let their voices be silenced. Maya's rise to public prominence demonstrates the mixed blessings of becoming a public figure in the fight for justice. While media attention can amplify a message, it can also bring undue pressure and criticism. This aspect of Maya's journey reflects the complicated relationship activists often have with the media and public opinion. On one hand, their platform can bring awareness and inspire change, but on the other, it can expose them to unwanted scrutiny and backlash from those who are uncomfortable with the issues they are raising. Maya's determination to continue speaking out, despite the criticism, is a testament to her resilience. It also underscores a larger point. The fight for racial equality is rarely easy or universally accepted. It requires constant advocacy, even when faced with those who try to dismiss or invalidate the experiences of marginalized people. One day, after a speaking event, a young woman approached Maya. Her voice was filled with emotion as she thanked Maya for sharing her story. "I was in a situation just like yours a few years ago," the woman said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But I never spoke up. I didn't think anyone would listen. But now, hearing you, I feel like I can finally find the strength to stand up for myself." Maya felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This was why she had kept fighting. This was why her voice mattered. It wasn't just about her, it was about the countless others who felt silenced, who felt afraid to speak out because they didn't think anyone would believe them. In that moment, Maya understood the true power of her journey. She had made a difference in someone else's life, just as others had done for her along the way. This moment of connection highlights the impact that sharing one's story can have on others. When Maya chose to stand up, she not only empowered herself, but also gave others the courage to do the same. The importance of this exchange cannot be understated. By speaking out, Maya became part of a larger network of individuals working to create change. Her story, though painful, had the potential to help others heal and find their own voices in the fight for justice. This is the ripple effect of activism. When one person speaks out, they empower others to do the same. It shows that the journey toward justice is not a solitary one. It's a collective effort that is strengthened by solidarity and mutual support. Months passed, and Maya's journey continued. She remained active in the fight for racial equality, speaking at rallies, writing articles, and working with various organizations to combat prejudice in all its forms. But no matter how much progress she made, she knew that the fight was ongoing. Maya's story had been one of strength, resilience, and victory, but she knew that many others were still facing the same struggles. The fight for racial justice didn't stop with her. It would continue long after the spotlight had moved on. She was determined to keep pushing forward, knowing that change didn't happen overnight. It took years of work, decades of activism, and a collective effort from people across the world. Maya's continued activism is a reminder that the fight for justice is never truly over. Even after personal victories, the larger battle continues. The systemic issues of racism and inequality require ongoing effort and vigilance. Maya's resolve to keep fighting for what is right, even after her personal journey had reached a significant turning point, highlights the long-term commitment required to bring about meaningful change. Her journey is not an isolated incident, but part of a broader movement for racial justice that will continue to evolve as society faces new challenges. Maya's story serves as an inspiration not only for those who experience racial aggression, but also for those who seek to stand in solidarity and demand justice for all. Maya's journey was a difficult one, filled with emotional highs and lows, moments of fear and courage, and a fight for justice that she could not have anticipated when she first parked her car that fateful day. But through it all, she emerged stronger and more determined to create a better world. Her story is a testament to the power of standing up for oneself and for others, and to the importance of fighting for justice. Even when the road ahead seems long and uncertain, Maya's victory was not just her own, it was a victory for all those who have been silenced, for all those who have faced racial discrimination and injustice. And as she continues her work, Maya knows that her fight is part of a larger movement, one that will carry on for generations to come. She remains hopeful, knowing that even small victories can lead to monumental change, and that together, we can build a world where justice, equality, and respect for all people prevail. Maya's journey isn't just a story of one woman standing up against one man. It's a reminder that every act of resistance, every fight for justice, is a crucial step toward a more just and equitable world. The fight for racial equality is ongoing, but as Maya has shown, change begins with each individual who dares to speak out and demand what is right. And in the end, that is the true power of a story. Its ability to inspire, to empower, and to create a lasting impact.